We will start with one of the major challenges: how to finance CCS when it's cheaper to emit CO2. For the past 4 years, Jannicke Bjerkås have been developing the CCS project at the waste-to-energy plant Fortum Oslo Varme. The project have been partially financed by the Norwegian state, but suffered a rejection from the EU Innovation Fund. With a military background, however, Jannicke Bjerkås is not the type that gives up easily, and she will now share insights on the way forward for the CCS project. Please welcome Jannicke Bjerkås.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Eivind. I hope you can hear me well. From my side, this sound is a little bit not too perfect, but hopefully you can hear me. So my name is Jannicke, and I'm employed with Fortum Oslo Varme and responsible for the carbon capture project, where we're aiming to establish a carbon capture at our waste-to-energy plant in Oslo. To start with a brief presentation of the company, Fortum Oslo Varme is a district heating company providing district heating and also developing in cooling to large buildings in Oslo. We have two owners. One of them is Fortum, which is an international energy company focusing on decarbonization of energy and sustainable city solution for waste handling. And our other owner is the city of Oslo. The city of Oslo has, similar to most other large cities in the world, quite ambitious climate goals. And for the city to reach its climate goals for 2030, this carbon capture project on the largest emission point in Oslo is important. A few more details about our project. If we are succeeding, we are hoping to be the world's first carbon capture, full-scale carbon capture and storage project in the world. We are a part of the Norwegian Longship project, which is a state project to establish a full value chain for carbon capture, transport, and permanent storage of the CO2 below the seabed in the North Sea. We are one of two capture projects, the other one being on cement production. The rest of the value chain for Longship has been fully financed by the state and is under development or is under construction. Our project has not received full funding yet, and we're still working on closing the remaining financing gap to get started with the construction phase as soon as possible. We are aiming to capture 400,000 tons of CO2 per year, which is 90% of the total emissions from this waste-to-energy plant. A particular advantage with waste-to-energy as an industry is that about 50% of the total emissions are biogenic, biological CO2 stemming from the incineration of biomass. And this, by capturing and storing this biological CO2, we are in effect removing CO2 from the atmosphere, which gives an extra climate value. And I will get back to that in a little bit. We have been working on our capture projects and developed it through feasibility, concept, and FEED studies since 2015. We delivered the FEED report at the end of 2019, and the final investment decision for the state was reached at the end of 2020. So we are basically fully matured and ready to go as soon as we have the total financing in place. If you have a look at the picture on the lower right, you can also see that our waste-to-energy plant is not situated at port, which means that we will have to transport the CO2 from our port to shore. And we're planning to do that using emission-free tank trucks, preferably electric trucks. But if that is not fully matured by the time we start the plant, we will be going with either biogas, hydrogen, or other emission-free solutions. We have, through the FEED study, also been testing the TOS technology on our specific flue gas for the waste to energy. We have also Shell's imine technology, and we have tested this thoroughly through the FEED phase for about 9 months, more than 5,000 test hours. And the results were very good. We had very low degradation of the amine. We had very high capture rate and also very low emissions, which was maybe the most important issue to make sure of building and operating this pilot plant. If you look at the picture on the lower right side, you can also see that all the colored parts are the planned CCS plants, including a filling station for side of the plant. The grays are the existing plants. And also are basically placed in the residential area, which means that the focus on emissions is critical, which is all why results from pilot testing was so important to us. We are part of this Norwegian full-scale project as one of 2 industries that are crucial for the world to reduce its emissions. There will always be waste, and we will need to find sustainable solutions for waste handling. This includes moving the waste basically up the so-called waste ladder or waste pyramid to reduce and reuse as much as possible of the waste, and to recycle the waste that is possible to recycle. But we also need a sustainable solution for the residual waste that is not possible to recycle or that we want to take out of the cycle because it's contaminated. And for that, we need waste to energy. And the most important step along this road is to get rid of polluting landfills, which are connected to large methane emissions, which again is responsible for about 20% of the global warming. So we need to focus on all these steps of sustainable waste handling. And we want to add the next step to this value chain by capturing and storing the CO2 from this end-of-line solution for residual waste. Now, if we look at the cycle, what we want to do, as I said, is to add another step to this circular economy, starting by getting rid of landfills to avoid methane emissions from landfills. The next step is to reuse as much as possible and to reuse the materials in the waste that is possible to recycle, and of course to reduce waste amounts as much as possible. The residual waste that we either cannot or should not recycle will need to be incinerated in waste to energy plants. These plants are point source emissions, are the sources of point emissions of CO2. And by adding CCS to this process, we can, in a very efficient manner, deal with these CO2 emissions from this end-of-line solution. And by doing that, we're not only reducing CO2 emissions from waste handling, but we're also removing carbon from the atmosphere by capturing and storing the biological CO2, which is a part of the natural CO2 cycle. And let's look a little bit more into the BECCS, or the biological CO2 and the removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. Now, what BECCS can contribute with, and BECCS stands for bioenergy combined with CCS, or you can also call it WECCS, waste to energy combined with CCS. By incinerating biomass, we are basically releasing the CO2 that has already been absorbed from the biomass. And when this is released back into the atmosphere, it's basically just a part of the natural CO2 cycle. Now, the problem is, of course, all the CO2 that we have added to this natural cycle by burning fossil energy, which means that we need to not only reduce emissions from fossil energy, but in order to maintain the 1.5 target and to deal with the global warming, we also need to take out CO2 from this natural cycle to deal with and to make up for the emissions that we cannot get rid of in the short term. And that's where BECCS comes in as an important climate measure. We also need actually negative emissions to be able to go back to 1.5 after a peak, which is where we're probably looking at now, because we are not able to reduce the fossil emissions in time. So this means that we will need large amounts of negative emissions or capturing of biological CO2 and storing it, which we all now call carbon removal, to deal with the climate change. And it's interesting to see that both countries, larger cities, and also large international companies are now very clear and committing to net zero goals, also including historical emissions by 2050. And this means, again, that negative emissions and carbon removal will be a key solution to reach these goals. If we look to the European Union, we can see that carbon removal and both nature-based and technology-based solutions to achieve these removals are gaining increased attention, which is important because per today we don't really have any incentives in place to capture this biological CO2. This CO2 is not counted on any emissions statistics, and there are no costs combined to emitting this CO2 either, of course. So it's basically no incentives in place, and this is where we need to go. We need to have a framework to actually certify that this ton of CO2 is captured and permanently removed from the cycle. And this technology will need to have a value, just as the capturing and the reduction of fossil emissions through the European trading system has a cost. We will need to have a value on the additional climate effect that we get by capturing and storing biological CO2. And this is advancing. EU has stated that they will come with a proposal in 2022, and likely this will address issues such as the permanence of the actual removal. It's important that it's not just a short delay of emissions, but that it's actually removing the CO2 in the long term to get the climate effect. It's also important to make sure that the solution and that the biomass used as an input to this process is sustainable. So this will also need to be part of the certification process. And last but certainly not least, it's also critical that this removal of CO2 will only be counted once. That is not double or triple counted by the company who's actually capturing it, by the city, by the company who's maybe buying this removal, and so on. So this is important to address in a legislation system from the EU. And we already now see that private initiatives are emerging. Several private marketplaces are already trading with carbon removals offered by companies either being able to offer technical solutions such as ours, either by BECCS or direct air capture and storage, or by nature-based solutions such as biochar, planting of trees, and so on. So a little bit back to our project. We definitely recognize the BECCS area of our project as an important future revenue stream to be able to finance these, both our project, but also future projects within the waste to energy industry. So, so this is definitely an important advantage that can help accelerate the development as soon as the framework is in place, and we will see an increasing value on the carbon removal area. But for now, this is still an area under development. And as I mentioned, the Longship project reached the final investment decision by the end of 2020, where our project received 3 billion Norwegian, which is about 300 million euros, to fund our capture project for investment and operations over 10 years. To find the remaining funding, we applied to the Innovation Fund first call, hoping to get support from the EU to realize our projects. Our advantage was that our project is fully matured, and it also has a BECCS factor that we can capture and store biological CO2, and it's easily replicable to other similar plants in all over Europe. However, as you probably know, we were rejected. Our project did not win support from the Innovation Fund, which is a setback for us, which means that we will need to find other means of funding the project, or we will have to apply again. Either way, this probably means a delay of the project. If we decide to apply again for the Innovation Fund, this means at least 12 to 15 months delay from the original timeline, where we were hoping to start operations at the end of 2020. Looking into the Innovation Fund process, there are 5 criteria being scored, and our project received a good score on 3 of them. And the project received a low score on project maturity, which was a surprise to us, as our perception was that this would be our main advantage in the competition. So in competition with several other large and advanced European projects, we did not make it all the way, unfortunately. Looking into the results from this first call, we can see that 70 projects were invited to submit the final application. 66 did, and out of those 66, 41 projects were overall the thresholds to be competitive. Only 7 projects received funding, and out of those 7, we had 4 large CCS projects, which is a very good signal, of course, that the EU is prioritizing CCS projects and focusing on supporting these projects for realization. On the Norwegian side, one Norwegian side made the reserve list, which means that they probably have a very good chance in the next call. So that's good news for Norway. Unfortunately, that was not our project. This was a battery technology project. We could also see that the average score for those projects that received funding was above 4. So it's definitely tough to go all the way in this European competition. We could also notice a diversion both on a regional level and on different technologies. Innovation Fund has 4 specific areas that they want to fund projects within, and they managed to spread this support on several different technologies and different sectors. For the call number 2 that has already been opened, we can see that there are a few changes to the criteria, but the main structure remains in place. There are some changes to criteria number 1, GHG emissions, where we can see that the Innovation Fund is scaling down the importance of the absolute GHG emissions reductions, which means that also smaller projects will be compatible. And also they are rewarding negative emissions to a larger degree. So that's good news for waste to energy and other carbon removal projects. On criteria number 5, they have also made some changes where state support is not necessarily an advantage anymore. So that is on our side for our project, not necessarily a good thing. And looking into our chances and the reflection on whether to apply again or not, I think it's a consideration that we're still working on. It's definitely not sure that the Innovation Fund will focus to the same degree on CCS projects for the next call. It's also very clear that the competition is hard, and a lot of other European projects are maturing as we speak, while our project is basically fully matured through the project's development phases. And while we can still modify and work on improving, the main maturing of the project has been executed already. So we will have to decide quite soon, of course, whether to apply or not. But it's not clear whether how our chances will be in the next call, and we will definitely need to work on our application to clarify some misunderstandings in our application. Now, looking into some of the experiences that we made as applicants to the first call of the Innovation Fund. As already stated, it's very clear that the competition is hard. Lots of good projects that are competitive for support from the Innovation Fund. It's also quite a lot of work, so our advice to those who are planning to apply for the next calls is to start in time and to not underestimate both the cost and also the timeline you will need to get the paperwork in order. We would also recommend to get help from an external consultant that knows the Innovation Fund or the EU system to help you with the application. But at the same time, it's important to stress that the knowledge is not with the consultant, it's within the company. So you will need to work a lot on the input to the applications, even if you have consultants to help you. It's also a tactical consideration how much you end up applying for, because the cost efficiency, the criteria number 5, is directly combined with the amount of support you're applying for. And there's a balance between how much to mature the project, which is one criteria, compared to how innovative the project is. So the project needs to have a large degree of innovation, but at the same time, it should be matured to a certain level to have credibility. So this is also a balance that you need to consider on the timing on when to apply for support. Our experience is also that it's important to highlight your project's strength in all parts of the application under all the criteria, because there are different evaluators reading and evaluating the different criteria. So it's important to make sure that your advantages and strong points are emphasized in each and every part of the application. For the next call, it seems to be priority on carbon removal projects, and it also seems to be pointing towards energy storage projects and thermal energy for the next call. So that's also something to keep in mind for the next projects. And for waste to energy projects, is important to notice that the carbon removal part will be important both to be able to compete for Innovation Fund support, but also to establish future revenue stream to co-finance these projects. Okay, I think I will stop there, and hopefully we will have time for a few questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jannicke, also for some good tips on how to apply for the EU Innovation Fund. I have one question to you from Øystein Livrød in Endrava. He keeps close track on your reported emissions, and he has the following question. So, you say that you want to capture 400,000 tons of CO2 per year. If you have a 90% capture rate, that means that the total emissions should be around 444,000 tons of CO2 per year. But when Øystein checked the official numbers, they say 365,000 tons of CO2 per year in emissions. Can you explain this deviation, please?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a good catch from from Endrava. But it's clear that our numbers is also including the planned expansion of the plant at Klemetsrud, either by modifying the existing plant to increase capacity or to build a new line 4. So the number of 400,000 is including a planned increased capacity from the waste to energy plant.
Understood. Thank you very much, Jannicke.